Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Parshas Ki Teitze. This is a very, very, this is like really an overwhelming parsha. I mean, last week there was a lot of mitzvahs. This week's just like a ton of mitzvahs. So I want to, as I like to do, I want to focus on a specific pasuk here, a sort of strange phrase that the Torah uses, and see a number of different explanations. And in fact, we'll see that, I don't know, maybe the most unusual or one of the most beautiful ones comes from the Mishnah itself. All right, so I think it's an interesting topic. The Torah tells us the following. This is after the first few, I think it's the first three mitzvahs that it tells us, which Rashi points out are connected. But the fourth concept that the Torah raises is in Perek Chaf Aleph, chapter 21, pasuk 22. All right, so the Torah tells us a quick halacha. When someone gets the death penalty, so then they hang them also. All right, in other words, part of the death penalty was also included hanging too. Okay, it's a debate in the Mishnah whether this was for all. We'll get into this a little bit later, whether this was for all death penalties or specific ones. But either way, some people get hanged. Lo salin nivlaso al ha'etz, so you can't hang it there, you can't leave it there. Ki kover tikberenu bayomahu, you have to bury him on that day. Ki kilalas elokim talui. All right, this is the phrase we'll come back to. The curse of God is hanging. Okay, obviously this is a very strange idea, right? The curse of God is hanging. So that's why, presumably, that's why you have to bury this person, this body, so that they don't leave it hanging. Okay. Don't contaminate your land. That Hashem, your God, is giving you as an inheritance. Okay, that's how the Torah explains what's going on over here. We don't want to contaminate this land, which is our special holy land of Israel. Okay, now so let's come back to that phrase. Ki kilulas elokim talui. The curse of God is hanging. Now, interestingly enough, okay, this is actually the source in the Torah for the mitzvah of burial. Okay, ki cover tigberenu. It's in a weird context, right? You would expect, it's a mitzvah that nowadays people take it one of the most serious mitzvahs. Even people that were barely observant, the mitzvah of burial is something that's very important to them. So you'd expect that the Torah would at least come out and just say it straight. But this is the context that the Torah chooses to give us the halacha of burial in the context of this capital punishment, right? Someone who's so wicked that they had to be killed, but even they have to be buried. So I'm sure there's a lot of depth to why the Torah puts that mitzvah in this context, and some of it we'll sort of touch on, but in an indirect way. So again, the way the Torah explains this mitzvah, though, that you have to bury this wicked person, is ki kilulas elokim tolui, because the curse of God is hanging. Okay, now I'm going to start with Rashi, even though chronologically, I want to go through a few explanations over here. I took, I think, I don't know. Okay, we'll see how exactly to divide it. I divided it here into 5, but it's really 7 explanations, but it's sort of 5 different ways of reading this verse. Rashi is not the most simple, I guess, but because he's Rashi, let's start with Rashi. All right, Rashi says something unbelievable over here. He quotes an unbelievable saying of the rabbis, that what does it mean that the curse of God is hanging, right? What does that phrase mean? So Rashi says it doesn't mean curse. All right, kilalas can also mean the zilzulo shel melech. It can also mean that it's denigrating. It's it brings down. It like, what's a good word? It's sort of, it denigrates the king. All right, it's unbecoming for the king, meaning Hashem, right? It's unbecoming for the king of the world to have someone hanging here. But the way Rashi says this is unbelievable. Sha'adam asli b'dmus diyukno. A person is made in the image of God. Okay, and here's this Yisrael heim banav, the Jews are his children. Okay, and now he gives this unbelievable metaphor. Mashal l'shnei achim ta'omim shayudomim zelazeh. He says there were 2 identical twins. All right, there were 2 identical twins. Echad nasa melech v'echad nitbas listios v'nitlo. One of them became the king, and one of them became a villain. All right, he became a thief. All right, so he was a criminal. So they killed him. They hung him. Kol haroeh oso omer hamelech talui. Anyone that sees the evil twin hanging, they think, oh my gosh, the king must have sinned. So Tziva Melech, what we do? The king said, get him out of there. Get him down. Because this is reflecting badly on me, right? People think I'm the one that sinned, right? There's like a lot of short stories, at least, based on this plot, right? That there's two twins, one of them's good, one of them's bad, right? So that's Rashi's metaphor. That there's two twins, one of them's evil, one of them's the king. So if they hang the evil brother, people mistake it for the king. So in the same way, I mean, this is just an unbelievable metaphor when you think about it. In the same way, when a Jew is hanging, so it looks like God is hanging because the Jews are created in the image of God, or let me put it differently. Every human is in the image of God, and the Jews are his children. So that's why God says you cannot have this person hanging. Obviously, no one's going to mistake it for God himself, but the point is that it's the same sort of denigration of God to have someone hanging in this disrespectful way. It reflects badly on God. So ki kilalas elokim talui means the denigration of God is hanging. Okay, that's just an unbelievable. I mean, the message, you almost don't even need to speak out the message of this, right? But here, and again, we're talking about a wicked person, right? Someone that was so wicked that the court killed them. And that person is so much a mirror image of God that it's disrespectful for God to have that person hanging because it reflects badly on God, right? It just gives you a sensitivity as to how we have to treat a person when we're interacting with a person. So we're interacting with someone that's a mirror image that reflects the very spirit of God, right? And we very often, or I'll say for myself, at least certainly, I take that lightly, right? We talk to people, they're a little annoying, right? They're whatever it is, right? Their joke wasn't funny. Okay, fine. Their joke wasn't funny, right? But they're still in the image of God. So that's better than any funny jokes. All right. So, okay, that's the lesson from Rashi's interpretation. Now, let me go to some other interpretations over here. And the way I'm going to group these is I want to go to the more like shot-oriented interpretations, all right? How to make sense of the verse on a simple level. And I want to look at two strains of commentary that read the pasuk differently than Rashi. Okay, and then we'll come back to some more ideological ideas. Okay, the first thing, this is a very interesting interpretation. Okay, this is in the Rashbam and the Sforno, two important commentaries. Now, they don't agree, and I'll tell you the differences between them, but what they do agree on is they don't believe that the word Elokim in this verse is a sanctified name. Okay, the word Elokim can mean sometimes it refers to God, in which case we say Elokim, right? But other times it's what we call a shem chol. It's a secular meaning. So, for example, you could call idolatry Elohim, right? The Torah will sometimes call false gods, idols, pagan gods Elohim. So that we wouldn't call that Elohim, right? That would be Elohim because it's meaningless. They have nothing, right? In the same way, the Torah will sometimes refer to judges, right? Sometimes a verse calls a judge Elohim or an officer. So you always have to know when you see this word, is it a sanctified word and you got to say Elohim, or is it a secular word? Is it talking about a human or a false god? And then it's Elohim. So the Rashbam and the Sforno interpret this verse that the word Elohim in this verse is a secular, it refers to people. Okay, so the Rashbam says something very interesting, that the curse of the Elohim, the judges, is hanging. All right, and the Rashbam says, something very contemporary, which is that when people see this body hanging, they get upset at the judges who passed the death sentence on him, right? So this guy's family and this guy's friends are getting more and more upset at the judges, and they start cursing the judges, right? This is a problem that we have nowadays. That there was this very, very big, I forget how long this was, but this was like a horrible tragedy. There was a guy that was sentenced by a judge, and then he went to her home and he killed her son. I don't know if you remember that. I think he shot the son and the husband maybe survived. Yeah, New Jersey. Yeah, horrible story. Part of the problem is because, right, everyone knows who the judge is, right? The guy knows who the judge is. He knows her address. So the Rashbam's sort of trying to deal with that, I guess, a related problem, which is you don't want the guy hanging here because the judges are going to get in trouble. Okay, the Sforno says something also related. which is he says that the word Elohim here is a reference to the part of ourselves which is rational, right? Every human being is made up of two parts. They have the physical, our bodies, and then there's our souls, which is our rational part. So the Sforno says that the Tanakh will very often use the word Elohim as a reference to the person's like intellect, right? The ability to think. So even though this person sinned, but their intellect, the part of them which is rational, which is spiritual, which is, elevated, is hanging. So that's not proper to hang. Okay, so according to both the Rashbam and the Sforno, this is not a reference to God at all. It's a reference either to the intellectual part of the person or to the judges. It's a human reference. All right, so that's approach number 2 to interpret this pasuk. Okay, so again, we have Rashi saying that God is disrespected because every human being is in his image, even a massive sinner. And then we have the Rashbam and the Sforno saying that it's talking about a human aspect. Okay, now let me go to the third way of interpreting it. Okay, this comes from the Ibn Ezra, and he rereads this verse because he says that the key, all right, the word key. Now, the word key, okay, I said Elohim is a confusing word, right? You have to know whether it's secular or sacred. The word key is probably the most confusing word. All right, according to the Gemara is a famous statement that the word key can have actually 4 meanings. Okay, it can have 4 different meanings. And there's a huge Rashi there where he goes through dozens, if not more, examples of the word key in the Tanakh, how it means different things. So the word key is super confusing. Now here, the standard, the way the other commentators are interpreting it is that it's explaining why do you have to bury this person, right? Key, because the image of God, right, the curse of God is hanging. So the key is explaining why do you have to bury them. The way the Ibn Ezra says the key is not why do you have to bury him, but why did he get killed? Okay, so it's a whole different meaning. In other words, the key is going back on why was this guy killed. Okay, and he says that ki kilalas Elokim, because he cursed God, so therefore he was hung. Okay, in other words, it's sort of explaining the background of the story, right? You don't leave him hanging there. You got to bury him that day. It's not explaining why you have to bury him. It's explaining him why did he get killed, because he cursed God. So therefore you have to. Therefore he was hung. All right. So I know this is a technical point, but I just want to point out that the Ibn Ezra has a different version of the key. Okay. Now let me just go to a few ideological things. Okay. This week my time management is great. Okay. I just want to go through a few ideological points. 3 more interpretations. All right. And each of them I think has a very, very important, teaching for us. Ending with the Mishnah's interpretation, which I think has really an unbelievable teaching. Okay, the Ibn Ezra has another interpretation, and he says that so this is in line with everybody else. All right, why do you have to bury him? Because the curse of God is hanging. And the Ibn Ezra explains like this. He says that the same way a dead body that's hanging has a physical stench, right? It begins to smell, right? It starts to rot and decompose, and you can smell it. So the same way a body has a physical stench, so he says that it also has a spiritual, stench, but I don't have it in front of me, right? But he says, I would read the phrase, but he basically says that it has a spiritual, it's like spiritually radioactive, all right? It's it's contagious. Right, it gives off. That's what the Torah is telling us. In other words, Ibn Ezra doesn't know this on his own, but that's what the Torah is telling us. That the kilalas Elokim means the curse of God comes from this, sinner's body, and it will infect all around them. Right, and that makes perfect sense with the next line in the Torah because it says, "Don't contaminate your land." So it doesn't just mean in a vague way, don't contaminate your land with sin or by having dead bodies hanging there. It means literally, don't contaminate your land with this spiritual, contagious energy that would come out of this sinner's body. Okay, what exactly that means, I'm not sure, but the reason why I do think this is an important lesson is because I think it's an interesting idea. I mean, I've never really thought or heard of something like this, but it is an interesting idea that there is a spiritual contagious. It kind of makes sense, right? When you think about it, why shouldn't there be that? In other words, we have in the physical world all sorts of contagious things, right? And when a dead body's decomposing, it gives off all sorts of things that could be harmful. So why shouldn't that be true also spiritually? I just think it's an interesting idea, right? And again, to come back to ourselves, right? It gives us a sense that what we do has real impact on the world. We might not see it, but what we do could have a real impact. Okay, that's the Ibn Ezra. Let me go to the Ramban. The Ramban has two explanations, but I'm only going to go through one. The Ramban says that what it means, ki kilas Elokim talui, that the curse of God is hanging there. So the way he interprets this is that. So now here's the issue. Who gets hung over here? Okay, who gets hung? So that's a debate in the Mishnah. So I forget who it was. Says one rabbi says that it was everybody. Okay, and then there's another opinion. Anyone that sins, not everybody, right? Anyone that sins that gets killed for a sin gets hung. Then there's another opinion that it's talking about who was it? Okay, there's another opinion that it's Megadeth and Oved Avodah Zarah, someone who curses God and worships idolatry. So those two sinners then get hung. So the Ramban says that what's going to happen if this guy's hanging? All right, this guy's sitting there, right? The body's there hanging. So everyone walking by is going to be like, oh, what happened? Why did he get hung? Right? Everyone wants to know the story, right? Like, right, when you're ever driving by the highway and suddenly everything stops by, right? Usually there's a accident on the other side, and everyone has to just stop by and see what's going on, right? So everyone has to see what's going on. They all want to know, why is this guy hanging? So everyone's going to start telling the story that he cursed God and he worshipped idolatry. So that's the disrespect of God, that this just goes on and on and on. Everyone keeps talking about the story over and over again, right? Instead of just letting it die out, right? Just burying the guy and being done with it. So spreading that information, right, is itself a disrespect of God. It's almost like, I'm just adding this myself, but it's almost like the opposite of Pirsume Nisa, right? We light the Hanukkah candles outside or out publicly so everyone knows what God did, right? The other way, this is like Pirsume Nisa for the negative, right? You're advertising the terrible thing that this guy did. So that's the curse of God, according to the Ramban, that you're spreading curses of God because everyone's now telling the story about this terrible sin. Okay. Now, the interesting thing over here is that the Chinuch, okay, the Sefer HaChinuch, who goes through a lot of the mitzvahs and explains them, he actually says the opposite notion. Okay, he says that the reason they hang the guy up is to spread what he did as a precautionary tale, right? We don't want people to mimic this guy. So we want everyone to see the terrible end of this guy so that they'll know that they shouldn't be, if they do this, this is going to be their end. So there seems to be like an interesting debate over here. I don't want to make too much about this because I don't know, but there seems to be a debate between the Ramban and the Sefer HaChinuch on a mega issue, right? What's the best way to deal with sinners? Privately, just deal with it and be done with it? Or do you advertise their downfall so that people can learn and they know not to do it? And I do think this is an issue. I'm not so involved in like justice or legal, justice types of issues, but I do think this is sort of an issue that crops up even in the contemporary world, right? What's the best way to punish people? Is it openly, publicly show people what happens to them, or the opposite? Does that show people that, people sinned and then they, they might get ideas in their own head? Right. So should you just sort of sweep it under the, just deal with it quietly and not advertise it? So, okay. Rashi makes a comment. Rashi says that the hanging was like 1 second. Rashi interprets the Mishnah that a guy would hang him and then pull him down. Rashi says there was no weight. So that seems like in line with the Ramban, that you just want to, cover it over, bury it up, and not advertise it, because according to the Sefer HaChinuch, it seems like you'd want to leave it up there a little bit. So, okay. So that's that issue. Now I want to just end with one last thing. I meant to get a Gemara Sanhedrin, but let me just pull it up here. This comes from the Mishnah in Sanhedrin. All right, this issue that we've been discussing is in the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, and then it gets into the issue of burying someone, and then it makes like an unbelievable comment. Let me just pull it up for a minute. On Sanhedrin. 46a. So the Mishnah quotes Amar Rabbi Meir, when a person is in pain, when someone's suffering, Shchina ma lashon omeres. What does God say? I mean, obviously, it doesn't say anything, but right, what in human terms? How can we imagine what he says? So the way he says it is kaleni meroshi, kaleni mizroi. All right, which Rashi interprets over here as meaning. I can even read it. Right, kaleni meroshi. I have no lightness to me. My head is not light. My arms are not light. Kmosha adam shiageya ve'oyef omer roshi kaved alai v'zroi kaved alai. Right, like someone says, my head is weighing down on me. Okay, so that's the imagery that God, according to Rabbi Meir, that's what God is saying. My head is weighing down on me. I'm weighed down by this person's suffering. Okay, an unbelievable line. Now Rashi doesn't make this explicit, but I do think from the Mishnah's context it's clear, and the other commentators do make this clear, that this is how he's reading the pasuk. Okay, so in other words, we just saw whatever it is. I guess technically 6 interpretations. This is now a 7th. What does it mean? Ki kilalas Elokim talui. It means not a curse, right? Most of the commentators interpret it as God's curse, right? Rashi interpreted it as God's disrespect. He interprets it as a conjunctive word. It's kil lace. Okay, kil lace is kilalas, which means I'm not lace, kill. I'm not like easy. I'm not light. I'm not lightweight. I'm burdened. I'm weighted down. Okay, I'm sure the language experts are going to have a problem with this, right? Because kil lace is probably Aramaic and kilas is Hebrew. But okay, all right. Yeah. Don't read it as kil lace. Yeah. Okay. So according to Rabbi Meir, it's kil lace. I'm not light, and the reason I'm not light is because this guy is suffering. This guy is hung. So God is weighed down by that. It's just an unbelievable image. And the Mishnah itself brings out the point of this. Right? If God is that broken about the death of a wicked person who sinned and deserved the death penalty, so then you can imagine how much more broken he is about the death of a righteous person. All right, so that's how the Mishnah takes it up. This is sort of the mirror of Rashi's lesson from this, right? In other words, Rashi's lesson is that we humans should not want to see a human being like hung, right? Because it's a denigration of God in the world. I mean, you could say it from God's perspective too, that he doesn't want his spirit, his divine presence denigrated. But the lesson, is for us really to understand that a human being is created in the image of God. The Mishnah's way of interpreting this is sort of the mirror, right? The reverse. That it teaches us how much God cares about every one of us, right? In other words, we should also take that to heart, but it's telling us how much God suffers with us, right? Even this wicked person who deserved the death penalty, but God was with them, right? And God is suffering along with their suffering. So all the more so a righteous person. And, okay. So let me end with that. That I think that's an unbelievable interpretation of the Mishnah. Kil lace, God has no lightness when this is going on. And on a practical level, I'll say 2 things. First of all, I think a lot of people have a sort of harsh, let's say, attitude towards people that get killed, right? That get the death penalty. That, good for them. They deserved it. And okay, that might be true, right? They might have deserved it, but to understand that God is suffering, right? God, and we should be suffering. A human being got killed, even if they deserved it. And, the other thing is just for ourselves, when we have something difficult go on, to recognize that God's with us. God's not lighthearted. God's not enjoying himself. But he's suffering, he's carrying it, so to speak. It's his burden too. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.